Hey everyone, what's going on? In this video, I'm going to talk about the Kentucky Derby this year and how the horse sovereignty is related to a theme that I have been following with the Kentucky Derby since 2019. And this theme has to do with the Mandela effect, which stemmed back to the original favorite to win that Kentucky Derby in 2019 was a horse named Omaha Beach. And that horse was trained by a guy named Richard Mandela. I will come back and explain this, but I thought that this year's Kentucky Derby might be connected to this because back in April I had this synchronicity with the Mandela effect and the movie Dumb and Dumber. I was at work scrolling through my phone and a clip of the part where Jim Carrey's at the gas station in Dumb and Dumber came up and he says, "Big gulps, huh? All right. Well, see you later." And that was just weird to me because either I've been saying it wrong my whole life or it is a Mandela effect. But I always remember him saying, "Big gulps, eh? Welp, see you later." And I've been saying it that way my entire life, and once again, I don't know if it's a Mandela effect, but to me, it seems like a Mandela effect because I've been saying it wrong my whole life. And even if you Google it, there's tons of people who've been saying "big gulp, eh? Welp, see you later." So it's connected to the Mandela effect. And I didn't think that much of it at the time. I asked a few people at work what they thought. And the next day I had to DJ at the bar and I left all my equipment there. So then the next night I went back to get all my stuff and the bar was closing. So I walked up to the other bar to have a few beers. And there was a group of young kids up there. And I went and sat with them. And they said, "Big gulps, huh? All right, well, see you later." And I was like, what are the odds? And I went and told them, I was like, "I've been saying this wrong my whole life. And just the other day I watched this video and I learned that I've been saying it wrong my whole life." And, I had a synchronicity with this movie involving the Mandela effect. And at the end of the blog post, I even wrote how I think maybe it's going to be connected to the Kentucky Derby. And maybe we'll get horses like named like Lloyd and Harry or something in the Kentucky Derby. And I hadn't looked at the horses in the Kentucky Derby at all, but I think it was the next day. And the next day, I just kind of looked through a list of the horses at the Kentucky Derby, and like the one Owen Almighty stood out to me just because of Jim Carrey, who's in the film Bruce Almighty. And in the film Bruce Almighty, think about how uh, Morgan Freeman is actually God in the movie Bruce Almighty, but Morgan Freeman is also in a movie called Invictus, where he portrays Nelson Mandela. The other horse, just by looking through the list, that stood out to me just by its name alone was the horse Sandman, right here. Sandman, and the reason this horse stood out to me was because the year before we had the horse Mystic Dan. Mystic Dan was the horse that won the Kentucky Derby. And what was interesting about this horse winning was that it was synced up to my book, which is called The Synchro Mystic. And my name is Dan. And this book cover is all about the number 86. And a lot of it had to do with the date, August 6, 2022, because I was following this big thing with Batman and going to the Batman midnight showing in 2012, the night that that movie got shot up. And everything about my experience was the number 86. And August 6, 2022 was also Tisha B'Av. And, we had been following that big Tisha B'Av event with 2019, the same year as the Kentucky Derby, where I started talking about the Mandela effect and such. But last year, the horse that won the Kentucky Derby was Mystic Dan, and its birthday just so happens to be 8 months and 6 days before my birthday, a lot like the cover of my book about the number 86. And it was also born the same year that I released my book. And in relation to this year, it's interesting because the trainer of this horse, Kenneth McPeak, his birthday's August 2nd. August 2nd just so happens to be the day that Tisha B'Av falls on this year. And as I'll get to when I go back and explain the 2019 Kentucky Derby stuff, it had a lot to do with the Flavian Dynasty and Titus, who was the ruler of the Flavian Dynasty, but Titus was the guy who destroyed the second temple in Jerusalem and Tisha B'Av is all about the destruction of the two temples in history. But anyway, the reason why I thought Sandman might be an important horse is because on August 6, 2022, the day I was following with my book, there was a big theme that I had with Sandman. The day before, I had walked down the stairs and I looked up at the TV and my kids were watching this movie called Rise of the Guardians. And it was right at the part where the Sandman gets overtaken by the darkness. And right as I saw that, I got a notification on my phone from Netflix that told me to watch the TV show called The Sandman. And something that was interesting was that I was following the cover of my book stuff that had to do with Batman, right? And Batman in the number 86. This movie, Rise of the Guardians, was also connected to Sandy Hook that happened the same year as the Batman theater shooting in 2012. And remember, the most powerful one is the Sandman, who they call Sandy, and then the main character carries the hook, right? So it's Sandy Hook. And this movie came out just before Sandy Hook, right after Hurricane Sandy, right after the Batman film pointed to Sandy Hook on the map that they changed to Sandy Hook instead of South Hinckley. So you knew Batman and Sandy Hook were related. And on August 6th that year, the day I was watching for my book, a big thing that I noticed was that Batman shooting was 4 months and 24 days before Sandy Hook had happened in 2012. And earlier in that year of 2022, I had learned a whole bunch of stuff about the number 424 and how it was related to Donald Trump touching the Western Wall and how it was related to Russia invading Ukraine. I'll go back and explain a lot of this stuff, but this number was super big with Russia invading Ukraine and Donald Trump touching the Western Wall and Donald Trump being the savior of Ukraine. So I just thought that was interesting, and I didn't put a picture in here, but on August 6th that year, the day I was watching for my book, there was a big story about how there was a statue of Vladimir Putin that appeared in a sandbox in Central Park. So Vladimir Putin and sand, let's think about Sandy Hook. And there was this big theme with sand and Sandy going on. And then we got the death of Sandy from Greece, Olivia Newton-John, and a whole bunch of stuff. There was this lady that I used to have to deliver food to who's lives kind of a block away from me. And I had a synchronicity with her on Vladimir Putin's birthday and a bunch of stuff. And then she ended up dying a month after that on National Batman Day. And her name was Sandy. And, this sandbox story about Vladimir Putin, it reminded me of the story of when there was a gravestone of Donald Trump put in the Central Park, I think in 2016 or 17. And the day before this happened with the Vladimir Putin statue, the same day I had the Sandman synchronicity, the headline story on CNN said, "A grave moment for Trump." So you knew that it was somehow interrelated. So, I'll come back and re-explain this, but I'm just trying to make the point that I thought Sandman was interesting because of how it related to my book and the connection to last year's Kentucky Derby, but also because it's related to Russia and Ukraine. And then there was also this Owen Almighty was interesting just because of the fact of the connection to the Mandela effect and such. And they're actually both kind of related because if you go back to 2019 and you look at the blog post that I have, I'm talking about, the Mandela effect, and I'm also talking about the connection to Russia and Vladimir Putin and such. And this is also why Donald Trump just recently, the day after the Kentucky Derby, the headline story was that Donald Trump wanted to reopen Alcatraz. Alcatraz is a maximum security prison, right? And remember, the day of the Kentucky Derby in 2019, the horse that actually won the race was named Maximum Security, but then Country House ended up winning the race because Maximum Security got disqualified. But on the same day as the Kentucky Derby, the other stories in the news was that there was this plane that crashed in Florida, or it skidded off the runway in Florida, and it was coming from Guantanamo Bay. And Guantanamo Bay is a maximum security. So, a plane that was coming from a maximum security place was a headline story in the news the same day that maximum security got disqualified in the Kentucky Derby. And once again, this year, the day after the Kentucky Derby, Donald Trump wanted to reopen Alcatraz, which is related to, maximum security. And Country House just so happened to be trained by this guy named Bill Mott, right? The trainer was Bill Mott. And this was the first win that he had won until this year when Sovereignty, the horse, won. Bill Mott was also the trainer of Sovereignty. So the 2019 horse trainer was also the same trainer as the one that won this year, Sovereignty. And, look at Sovereignty's birthday, 2/22/22. Remember what was really big in the news around 2/22/22 was when Joe Biden got up on stage to talk about Russia and Ukraine at 2/22 on 2/22/22. I mean, that was just before Russia invaded Ukraine and such, but if you go back and look at all my videos here, notice I'm talking about the Mandela effect, and then this was in December when we had Medina Spirit die and such, but then we had Medina Spirit's win nullified on 2/21 that year. And then, so I had just made a blog post about Medina Spirit dying and how it was connected to the number 219, and 219 was this big number I was following with the horse theme and so on. But later that night, it was after midnight, so it became 2/22/22, right? And I was getting tired, and I had just made this blog post about the horse, Medina Spirit, and so on. But I was getting tired, and I just found a random movie on Netflix. It was one of the first ones that came up. It's called He's All That. And I remember the movie She's All That, so I just kind of clicked on it, and I was laying there, and I was almost asleep. And then I heard the TV, the show say, "He loves horses." And I looked, and it was 2:22 in the morning on 2/22/22. And in this movie, I guess, apparently the main character, he loves horses. That's the thing in the movie. And I'm like, what are the odds I would click on this random movie, and it's about some kid who loves horses, and they even say he loves horses, and I'm almost asleep, and I wake up, and I see that it's 2:22 in the morning on 2/22/22. And there was some other synchronicities with this movie or whatever, but then I woke up a little bit, and I couldn't fall back asleep, and I started looking at the Kentucky Derby, or started looking into this movie, and I remember the old movie She's All That, and it had the song Kiss Me by Sixpence None the Richer, and I was kind of looking at that song, and I noticed that the band A Newfound Glory had remade that song. And if you go back to 2017, I was following this theme that involved the Wendy Williams and the movie Stand By Me, and it all related back to the band A Newfound Glory. And I started thinking about how I have a song called Horny Bear, where one of the lyrics is Wendy Williams looks like a horse. So I thought, oh, if there's anything to do with this horse theme, it might be related to Wendy Williams, And then 10 hours later, Wendy Williams was a headline news story, and the Wendy Williams show had been canceled or whatever on 2/22/22. After I blogged about how I thought that Wendy Williams might be important to this horse narrative, and all because I had a synchronicity, But I'm bringing this up because Wendy Williams' birthday just so happens to be July 18th, which just so happens to be the same birthday as Nelson Mandela, right? So Nelson Mandela. And this big number I was following with the Mandela effect and the horse theme was 219, and that just so happened to be 219 days after Wendy Williams' birthday. But, of course, anybody else who would have decoded it would have said that her birthday's 18/7, that means Society of Jesus, and 219 means Roman Catholic Church, and they would have blamed it on the Jesuits. And the point is, I didn't have to blame it on the Jesuits whatsoever, and Wendy Williams ended up being the news story the very next day connected to the Mandela effect that has absolutely nothing to do with the Jesuits. Or at least you can't prove that it does. But the point is that if you go back and look when this horse was born, everything I was blogging about was a horse theme and how it was related to Russia and Ukraine and the invasion of Russia and Ukraine, We had all kinds of stuff, even like the new South Park episode that had came out right after that. They were making fun of a horse and Vladimir Putin, right? But if you go back to 2019 and you look at these blog posts I was talking about around the time of the Mandela effect, talking about the maximum security thing, the same day as the 2019 Kentucky Derby, somebody left me this comment that makes zero sense. It says, so when Putin arrives, what are you supposed to Google when Putin states that he did something on the plane? It's not even like a coherent thought, is it? How does that even make any sense? So when Putin arrives, what are you supposed to Google when Putin states he did something on the plane? And they commented on this old Family Guy video I have about Donald Trump, or about Peter Griffin and Vladimir Putin. In that episode, Peter Griffin is watching a video of Rocky, but it was like a Russian bootleg one where Rocky actually loses to the Russian, and then, Peter wants to box Vladimir Putin and such. And what was funny is after I watched this, a few days later, there was a headline story in the news about how Donald Trump said the media wanted him to box Vladimir Putin. But the point is, on the day of the Kentucky Derby, I got this weird comment about Vladimir Putin and a plane. And then the very next day, the headline story was that there was a plane fire that happened in Russia and 13 people died. Later, they said it was like 41 people. It's like, what are the odds someone leaves me this weird comment about Putin and a plane that makes no sense to the video that they commented on? And then the next day, there's a story about Putin and a plane. And then you start thinking about that plane that skidded off the runway coming from Guantanamo Bay, the maximum security. And that was in Florida, where it skidded off the runway. Remember, Putin also had a video where he showed, he was boasting his military might, and he showed videos of missiles hitting Florida. So I don't feel like that's a coincidence that they had a plane from Guantanamo Bay, the maximum security, skid off the runway the same day as the Kentucky Derby where maximum security gets disqualified. And it was in Florida. The same day I get a comment about Vladimir Putin and planes. And then the next day there's a story about a plane fire in Russia. And further, when you look at that episode that person commented on, so I had this video, and they were commenting on this video I made about the Family Guy episode with Vladimir Putin. If you go and look up that video on the Wikia page, notice the thumbnail that they use is Vladimir Putin and Peter Griffin riding horses together. Once again, this connection to the horse, Mandela effect, and Russia and Ukraine thing. And then, right after Russia invades Ukraine, the next South Park episode is about a horse, and also they're making fun of Vladimir Putin. So there's definitely a theme with how Russia and Ukraine are linked to the Kentucky Derbies. And then this year we get sovereignty, and think about that with Russia and Ukraine, just the name in general, sovereignty. And, it's born the same day that I have a synchronicity with horses linked up to the Mandela effect. Right around the same time that Russia goes to invade Ukraine. And, it's unfortunate that I didn't have time to look into all the horses. I only had a few days to even kind of look into them. And then were just the two horses that stuck out was Sandman and Owen Almighty. I don't make predictions anymore. I'm just following patterns. And, it's exactly what I was talking about. There's also, though, like, at the time when I was looking at them horses, you couldn't even find half of their birthdays. I don't even know. I had no idea this horse was born on 2/22/22. That would have really stuck out to me if I would have saw it. But when you clicked on it, it didn't have a birthday associated with it. Even on the Kentucky Derby website, I couldn't find the birthday for a lot of the horses. So, but even so, it's connected to this Mandela effect theme. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to go back and re-explain it from the very beginning of 2019 and kind of go in order so it makes a little bit more sense. But I mean, there's a lot of interesting things that seem to relate back to Tisha B'Av, which begins on August 2nd this year. But I say that because like things such as like Alcatraz, if you look up Alcatraz, it actually opened on August 11th. And remember in 2019, the year of the Kentucky Derby, the Gematria Truth community was following the date August 11th because that was the day of Tisha B'Av and how it was related to the Golden Gate Bridge and also the possible construction of the third temple was a big thing that we were following with this date in 2019. And then, think about how Titus was important to that Kentucky Derby, and Titus was the one who destroyed the second temple in Jerusalem. And then you think about this number 424 with Donald Trump and how he touched the Western Wall at 424, and his name in all capital letters equals 424, and there was the guys from Israel that said that his name in Hebrew, Gematria, equals 424, just like a form of the Messiah, and he was like the Messiah or the Savior of Ukraine. And then you think about how the war in Israel began in 2023 on Vladimir Putin's birthday, right? So the war in Israel began on Vladimir Putin's birthday. There's a lot of interesting connections here, and it all seems to go back to Tisha B'Av and the 2019 Kentucky Derby. I should also point out that Donald Trump was put on a coin with King Cyrus in Israel when he was the president. And King Cyrus is important because he restored Jerusalem, which led to the eventual building of the second temple, the one that Titus destroyed. But anyway, I'm going to go back and explain this 2019 stuff and how it related to the Mandela effect with the Kentucky Derby and so on. So in 2019, in April, somebody had pointed out that the favorite horse for the Kentucky Derby was named Omaha Beach. And I just kind of looked at Omaha Beach. I noticed that the trainer was named Richard Mandela. And I didn't think that much of the Mandela effect at the time. But, he had the birthday of November 5th, which is an interesting day with time travel because in a bunch of old movies about time travel, the time travel date is November 5th, like Back to the Future and such. And the Mandela effect kind of, sort of involves time travel and different timelines and whatever. So I thought that was kind of interesting, but I didn't really blog about it or think that much of it. But a few days later, or whatever it was just a week later, I think it was, I started documenting about the Jeopardy stuff that was going on. There was a bunch of stuff with Jeopardy James going on in the news, and then Alex Trebek had announced that he had cancer. And all of that stemmed back to the umbrella symbolism that I had followed, that I've talked about in tons of videos. And it made me, I didn't know reverse gematria at the time, so it made me want to look into Ken Jennings, who was important to Jeopardy. So I kind of went back and I looked at Ken Jennings, and I looked at the gematria and so on, such as how his name equals 175 in the reverse cipher. And he lost on Jeopardy 175 days before his birthday. And a whole bunch of other stuff, I was just looking at the Jeopardy stuff because Jeopardy had been important in the news again. And in the mix of this, I think it was the same day, I got a comment on this old video that I have about the Mandela effect. Lynn Swann is now Lyle Swann. And that's the only video that I had at the time about the Mandela effect. And it had to do with, I had looked up this movie I can't remember what I looked up the movie for, but I had looked up this movie, The Adventures of Lyle Swann. And when I looked it up, on Wikipedia, it had said The Adventures of Lynn Swann. And then when I went back to it, it said Lyle Swann. And I was like, well, that's supposed to be a Mandela effect thing or something. And even when you Googled it and everywhere else, there was tons of places where it said the movie was called The Adventures of Lynn Swann. Or Timerider, The Adventures of Lynn Swann. So I just kind of lumped that in there. I was like, this must be a Mandela effect thing that people have. I never even watched the movie. I can't even remember exactly why I even stumbled upon even looking into this movie. But moral of the story was, I had a video about a lot of people thinking that this was a Mandela effect. And I had noticed on Wikipedia that it even said Lynn Swann once upon a time. But basically, I made the blog post about Ken Jennings, and then I saw that I had this comment from, somebody on this video talking about how it was always Lynn Swann and not, or always Lyle Swann and not Lynn Swann or whatever, right? And once again, still didn't really think that much into it, just kind of made a short blog post. There was some other stuff going on with the Big Bang Theory at this time that I'm going to leave out, but it had to do with learning the capital letter ciphers and that was related to the umbrella stuff, and it had a lot to do with the Big Bang Theory and Penny on the Big Bang Theory, who married a guy who rode horses, or he was an equestrian and so on. I'm going to skip over that, but the point is, I was blogging about Jeopardy, then I get this comment on this old video I have about the Mandela effect, and then I was looking more into Jeopardy, and I was reading about Alex Trebek, and it said Trebek made broadcast history by becoming the first person to host 3 American game shows at the same time, earning this distinction on February 4th, 1991, when he took over for Lynn Swann as host of NBC's To Tell the Truth. And think about how, in the mix of looking at Jeopardy, somebody commented on my old video about the Mandela effect that involved Lynn Swann. Then I go back and look more into Jeopardy, and here we are, Alex Trebek has a connection to Lynn Swann and becoming, making a history in broadcast history. So I started thinking there has to be something going on. I'm supposed to see something with the Mandela effect and, a whole bunch of stuff. It's funny, I even talked about Cliff Clavin in this post. And, well, I'll explain that at the end of the video. There's a Cliff theme that involves the umbrella symbolism. But, moral of the story, I started thinking about there must be something going on with the Mandela effect. And then I started thinking about how the horse, Omaha Beach, was trained by the guy named Richard Mandela. And I was like, maybe there's something important to that horse and so on. And then the horse ended up getting scratched for the Kentucky Derby. But I noticed that Richard Mandela's birthday was November 5th. And like I said, I thought I put that in here, but yeah, Richard Mandela's birthday, November 5th. And once again, in the movie Timerider, The Adventures of Lyle Swann, the time travel date is November 5th. Same with this movie, Time After Time. Same with Back to the Future. So I was like, there has to be a connection to the Mandela effect and the Kentucky Derby and how it's important. And I even went and I looked up the Mandela effect on my blog, and the only blog post that I have in relation to the Mandela effect at the time was how when Donald Trump had his national convention in Cleveland, he walked out to the song We Are the Champions. And I re-listened to the song We Are the Champions, and they no longer say of the world at the end, right? I always remember it saying of the world and then the song ending. Well, it doesn't do that anymore, or maybe it never did, but regardless, it's a Mandela effect. And what was interesting about that was the fact that Donald Trump's national convention was on July 18th, which just so happened to be Nelson Mandela's birthday. And maybe I'll talk about this in a little bit too, because the following year, just before the Kentucky Derby, I had a bunch of synchronicities with the Mandela effect again, and it was related to a theme with ducks. And the Mighty Ducks, if you watch the second Mighty Ducks movie, they're actually on a campfire and they're singing We Are the Champions. And the very end of the movie, it ends with them singing of the world, and then the movie ends. So I thought possibly that is where the Mandela effect part comes from, is because of that movie, from the Mighty Ducks. And that same day that I had all them synchronicities, there was a guy from South Africa named Dennis Goldberg who had died. Think about Goldberg, the goalie, and the Mighty Ducks, and so on. So there was this weird important thing to South Africa, the Mandela effect, the Mighty Ducks. And, Nelson Mandela is from South Africa. That's why it makes sense. Also in 2020, because of coronavirus, they changed the date of the Kentucky Derby to September 5th, which is interesting because if you write out Mandela effect, it equals 95. And Freddie Mercury, right, the lead singer of Queen, the guy who sings We Are the Champions, his birthday just so happens to be September 5th as well. So it seemed to be a perfect day to move the Kentucky Derby to in relation to the Mandela effect. But anyway, let's stick on 2019. So 2019, like I said, I was blogging about Jeopardy, then I got the comment about the Mandela effect, then I noticed that Alex Trebek had a connection to that Mandela effect comment, then I saw that Richard Mandela was the trainer of Omaha Beach, and Omaha Beach got scratched. So then we had the Kentucky Derby, and the Kentucky Derby ended up being, the winner was Country House after maximum security got disqualified. And, once again, remember the plane that skidded off the runway and from Guantanamo Bay was linked to the maximum security thing. But the day of that Kentucky Derby, I had a band gig in Omaha, and there was the interstate was flooded, so you had to take like a different way, and I had to go down 30th Street to get to this band gig. And as I was driving down 30th Street, I was trying to load my phone to see who won the Kentucky Derby, but for whatever the reason, the service was bad, and it wasn't working right. And anyway, so it wasn't working right. I couldn't get it to load. And I happened to look up, and I noticed that I was right next to Titus Avenue. Titus, right? I'm actually going to move over to this other blog post really quick, but it was in this blog post where I'm talking about it. But I'm driving down 30th Street, and the Kentucky Derby won't load on my phone, and I look up and I see Titus Avenue. And I thought it was funny because earlier in the day, I was talking to the ladies at work about how my girlfriend wanted to name our son that she was pregnant with Titus. And I thought, it doesn't have a ring to it. I don't like the name Titus. And we talked about the name Titus for probably an hour at work, and then I'm trying to load my phone, and I just randomly look up and I see I'm by Titus Avenue. And I thought that was funny. And then when my phone finally loaded the winner of the Kentucky Derby, and it showed that Flavian Pratt had won on the horse Country House after maximum security was disqualified, right as it loaded and showed me the winner, I looked over and I noticed I was by Nelson Mandela Elementary School. And for one, I didn't even know that there even existed such a thing in Omaha, a Nelson Mandela Elementary. Let alone did I know I was driving down a road that had a Nelson Mandela Elementary. And it's even funnier thinking about Richard Mandela, who had the horse Omaha Beach, and then this happens in Omaha. And even more funny is the fact that the original jockey for Omaha Beach was the guy Flavian Pratt, and then he ended up winning on Country House, right? So the original jockey for Omaha Beach, which was scratched, which was the favorite to win, it was this guy. But then this guy ended up winning on Country House. And I looked into Titus. I looked up Titus on Wikipedia, right? The ruler Titus. And I noticed that he ruled during the Flavian Dynasty. So then I was like, how interesting is that? We got, he's the ruler during the Flavian Dynasty, and then the guy named Flavian Pratt ends up winning on Country Horse, or Country House. And there was another horse called Tacitus, right here, Tacitus. There was another horse. And if you look up Tacitus, he was a guy who also lived during the Flavian Dynasty, and he said he owed his rank to the Flavian Dynasty and such. So I knew there was something important to that, and the Flavian Dynasty, and when Titus ruled, that was during the eruption of Pompeii, right? Or Mount Vesuvius that destroyed Pompeii. And I also saw that Titus was the ruler who destroyed the second temple in Israel. And this was interesting once again because in 2019, the Gematria Truth Community was following the date August 11th in relation to Tisha B'Av and the possible construction of the third temple in Jerusalem. I should point out too, the horse Tacitus horse. It was also trained by Bill Mott. Bill Mott was the trainer. Remember, Bill Mott was the trainer of Country House, the horse that won the 2019 Kentucky Derby. And Bill Mott was also the trainer of Sovereignty, who just won the recent Kentucky Derby. So I knew there was some reason that this Kentucky Derby was somehow linked up to, once again, the Mandela effect, how it linked up to the temples in Jerusalem and Tisha B'Av. It was also related to a volcano symbolism through the Flavian Dynasty. And this was also interesting in relation to Jeopardy because around the same time I was also talking about the movie White Men Can't Jump. And if you've ever seen that movie, when Gloria gets on Jeopardy, one of the things they emphasize is the question about Mount Vesuvius. And she says Mount Vesuvius, and then they end up giving it to her. Mount Vesuvius is what erupted that destroyed Pompeii during the Flavian Dynasty. And then when you top it off with all the connections to Russia and Ukraine, right? How I got that weird comment about Putin and the plane. And then, it was on the video where they used the thumbnail with Peter Griffin and Putin riding horses. And then there was a plane fire in Russia. It all seemed to kind of correspond with Russia and Ukraine. And now we get Sovereignty who wins. And Sovereignty's birthday is 2/22/22. And I was following a humongous horse theme on that around that time, and that's when Russia invaded Ukraine. And even if you go back to just before Russia invaded Ukraine, the months leading up to it, I was talking all about this number 219 and how there was a big thing with the Mandela effect of South Africa going on. And the guy who wrote the movie Timerider, The Adventures of Lyle Swann, he even died. And then we later got the death of Fred Ward, who was the main actor in that movie. And we got the death of Medina Spirit, the horse who had won the Kentucky Derby in 2021. Let me go back and show you some of these things here. So like in the months of 2021, leading up to like November, I kept seeing the number 219 a whole bunch. I didn't know what the number 219 meant. And I'll explain that in a second, but in the beginning of November, we got the death of the South African who supported Nelson Mandela, I believe. F.W. de Klerk, he had died. And this was interesting, just because he was from South Africa. And we also had a story right around the same time about Emilio Estevez, the coach on the Mighty Ducks, who was quitting the new TV series because he didn't want to get vaccinated or something of the sort, right? So I was like, the Mighty Ducks are in the news, and now a guy from South Africa dies. And remember 2020, how I was talking about that synchronicity with ducks and how it related to the Mandela effect with We Are the Champions and such. And, I pointed out how South Africa equals 173, F.W. de Klerk equals 173, the Mighty Ducks equal 173. And in 2020, when I noticed that pattern with the Mighty Ducks and the Mandela effect, the same day we got the death of the South African Dennis Goldberg, whose name also equaled 173. So I started thinking, there must be something to this Mandela effect theme again in November. And, there was a whole bunch of stories. I had a Mandela effect with the word jalapeno. We had the death of young Dolph that had a whole bunch of 219 to it. But notice at the very end of the blog post, I even talk about Jim Carrey and Dumb and Dumber and how Jeff Daniels, the other guy in Dumb and Dumber, was born on 219. So it's just interesting with my recent sync with Dumb and Dumber that began all of my thoughts of this, of why it might be connected to the 2025 Kentucky Derby. But, there was a boat drowning that reminded me of the duck boat drowning that had been important. There was all kinds of stuff here. Then we got a big news story was that there was the Omicron variant of COVID-19, and it was found in South Africa. And once again, I pointed out how F.W. de Klerk had just died, and Omicron equaled 173, just like South Africa and all these other things that I just talked about. And then I was looking at the president of South Africa, and I noticed that his name equals 219. And since I had been following this thing with the 219, I wondered if he was probably going to get coronavirus. I wonder if this guy will get the Omicron variant or something, just because I had following that pattern with 219. And of course he did get it the next month, or not that long after this. I'll talk about that in a second, but just want to point out there's other stories. Like I had synchronicity with horse one day, a whole bunch of stuff. And on that same day, we got the story about Jussie Smollett and how his trial was beginning or whatever. Remember Jussie Smollett, the guy who faked the race thing? He was also in the movie The Mighty Ducks or whatever, right? So I knew, once again, there was a connection here to the horse theme, how it linked to South Africa, how it was linked to the Mighty Ducks. Then in December, we got the death of Medina Spirit, who was the Kentucky Derby horse, and everything about Medina Spirit was 219. Let's see here. Medina Spirit died 219 days after the Kentucky Derby. It also died 2 months, 19 days after its owner's birthday. The word Kentucky equals 219. Point out some other connections to the horse theme with Nelson Mandela, but, it died 219 days after the Kentucky Derby, 2 months and 19 days after its owner's birthday. There was a whole bunch of 219s. I'm trying to backtrack and think about it all, but let me see here. I know the president of, here we go, South African president, December 12th, test positive for COVID-19, right? So this guy got coronavirus, and it was 69 days before 219, and his name equals 69 and 219. The word president also equals 219. It was also a span of 219 days before Nelson Mandela's birthday, and Nelson Mandela equals 69. So that guy's name and Nelson Mandela equals 69. He got coronavirus 69 days before 219, 219 days before Nelson Mandela's birthday. Let's see if I wrote any more in here. But, as you can see, there was a bunch of stuff with 219. There's all kinds of stuff I was talking about with the Mandela effect, Demaryius Thomas dying, and that's how it related to the Denver Broncos, which is the horse. There's all kinds of stuff. But then we got, where is it here? Desmond Tutu, that was another guy who died. Another guy from South Africa had died, Desmond Tutu, and he died 2 months, 19 days after his birthday. And think about his last name. I mean, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but in America that looks like Tutu. Think about 22222. If you write out Nelson Mandela equals 222 in Gematria. So hopefully you can see what I'm talking about. And then we got the death of Michael Neesmith right after this, the guy from the Monkees. But Michael Neesmith just so happened to be the guy who, I'm trying to think, let me see here, I can't remember it all. He wrote this movie. He wrote the movie The Adventure of Lyle Swann, right? The movie that I had a Mandela effect synchronicity with in 2019, and the whole reason that I started thinking that Richard Mandela and the Mandela effect was important to the horse racing stuff. So what are the odds all these things with South Africa are coming up and people are dying and getting coronavirus, all linked to the number 219? You had Medina Spirit die 219 days after the Kentucky Derby. Alex Trebek even equals 219, who was also part of that. And the person who left me that comment about Vladimir Putin and a plane, let me find that really quick. The person who left me the comment about Vladimir Putin and a plane, I looked up their name again in February that year, but, why can't I find it here? Something, was it impaired something? Sorry, let me get it here. Thinking impaired. And once again, are these Francis Bacon ciphers? If you write out thinking impaired, it just so happens to equal 219. So even that person who left a comment about Vladimir Putin on my, right after the 2019 Kentucky Derby, even their name equaled 219. Then we also got the death of Fred Ward, and Fred Ward is the main actor in the movie The Adventure of Lyle Swann, right? So he died on May 8th of 2022. And once again, if you look up this movie, in the movie, his character's name is Earl Bassett. But then if you look at the ending credits of the movie, they call him Earl Bass. Once again, reminding you of the Mandela effect, right? Like they messed up the name, so on the ending credits, they put Earl Bass, but in the movie, his name's Earl Bassett. You know what I'm saying? It's all connected to the same narrative with the Mandela effect. And once again, I'm bringing all this up just for the fact that, sovereignty was born on the same day I had this synchronicity with horses at 2:22 in the morning on 2/22/22, and I thought that it was important to Wendy Williams, and then Wendy Williams her show ends up getting canceled on that same day, and that was 219 days after her birthday, and her birthday was the same day as Nelson Mandela, so it was even 219 days after Nelson Mandela's birthday. And think about South Africa in relation to the news recently. We got stories about, uh, Donald Trump. He's going to be meeting with the South African leader. We just got a story the other day, right after the Kentucky Derby, about the South African refugees. And then when you tie in all the connections to Vladimir Putin and Russia, there's some interesting things going on here. And then we get the story about Alcatraz, Trump wanting to reopen Alcatraz, the maximum security that goes back to the 2019 theme with the Mandela effect. And, 2022 was the year that I was following with my book. And a lot of it had to do with how August 6th was the beginning of Tisha B'Av that year. And all that stuff with Russia and Ukraine happened on August 6th that year. There was also a Batman stuntman, David Leah, had died on August 6th that year. And once again, it was connected to Batman. And I learned a big thing about Russia and Ukraine in relation to Batman and Sandy Hook that year on August 6th. And once again, the thing with the third temple, it goes back to the 2019 Kentucky Derby with Titus, who destroyed the second temple. And Donald Trump was on a coin with King Cyrus. Cyrus is responsible for, restoring Jerusalem, which made way for the second temple to be rebuilt. And in 2022, before August 6th, Zenith of the Alpha America had pointed out a whole bunch of stuff about Donald Trump and the number 424, such as how he touched the Western Wall at 4:24 p.m. And there was an article about these two Jewish guys, and one was named Lev Parnas, and they told Donald Trump at a meeting that was recorded that Donald Trump's name in the Hebrew lettering equals 424, and that was like some form of the Messiah. And then they said that Donald Trump was like the savior of Ukraine. And think about the Capitol insurrection and these capital letter ciphers and why they're important to the Capitol insurrection. I also talked about in a previous video how I started paying attention to the capital letter ciphers in 2019 as well, right? The year of that Kentucky Derby with the capital letter ciphers. That's when I started thinking they were going to be important, and I thought they were going to be important in relation to the 2019 Tisha B'Av that fell on August 11th, or that was the second day of it. But anyway, in these capital letter ciphers, if you write out Donald Trump in all capital letters, his name equals 424. If you write out sovereignty in all capital letters, it also equals 424 in the capital letter cipher. And to connect it to Omaha Beach, look at Omaha Beach, the horse. Omaha Beach, the horse, its birthday, 424. Another interesting thing in relation to August 11th, 2019, Tisha B'Av. Remember, Alcatraz was opened on August 11th. Think about the Golden Gate Bridge and Alcatraz being outside of San Francisco and so on. But if you go from August 11th, 2019, and you go back to Donald Trump, you go back 424 days, it just so happens to take you to Donald Trump's birthday. So August 11th, 2019, you go back a span of 424 days, takes you to Donald Trump's birthday. If you go forward from that day, a span of 424 days, takes you to Vladimir Putin's birthday. So Tisha B'Av 2019 was 424 days before Putin's birthday and 424 days after Donald Trump's birthday. Remember in the beginning of the video when I was talking all about the sand thing and how my book was related to Mystic Dan? And the cover of my book was all about 8/6/2022, which was the day that Tisha B'Av began. Right? And this is where on August 6th that year we had the story about Vladimir Putin's statue in the sandbox. And that was just after the story of they had a grave moment for Donald Trump the day before, and there was that grave that was found in Central Park of Donald Trump in whatever year that was. I think it was 2016 or 17, but there was all these things with it. Well, the reason I'm bringing it up is just August 6, 2022. was the big day that was connected to the Kentucky Derby last year in relation to my book, but it was also Tisha B'Av in 2022 that connects back to that same thing. And if you went from August 6, 2022, and you went forward 424 days, it just so happened to take you to the date 10/4/23. And remember, that was the day that both the United States had the presidential alert and Russia also had Russia had a emergency alert on that same day. So both Russia and America, or United States, had an emergency alert that went out 424 days after August 6, 2022, which was Tisha B'Av. And then just days later, we had an attack near the Western Wall on August 13th, 2022. And when Donald Trump touched the Western Wall, he did it 811 days before August 11th, 2019, the big day with Tisha B'Av. So this just makes me think that there's something important to Tisha B'Av this year, or maybe the dates August 6th and August 11th, right? So I'm going to pay attention to them. And another reason why is that Tisha B'Av this year falls on August 2nd, 8/2. And think about the stuff back with Titus, how there was the volcano eruption of Mount Vesuvius, and also he destroyed the Second Temple. If you write out Volcano, it equals 28 and 82, which links up to the date August 2nd. If you write out Alcatraz, it equals 28 and 82, which links up to August 2nd. Remember, Alcatraz was opened on August 11th. If you write out Tisha B'Av, it equals 28 and 82. So it just seems like it's such a perfect day for Tisha B'Av to fall on this year in relation to this theme that I'm following. And once again, last year, the Mystic Dan one in connection to my book that was related to Tisha B'Av, and the trainer of Mystic Dan, his birthday is August 2nd. J.D. Vance's birthday is also August 2nd, and I have old blog posts where I talked about J.D. Vance and being important to the volcano symbolism. You know, J.D. Vance also met Pope Francis the day before he died, which was also, and that day before Pope Francis died was the day I had that synchronicity with Dumb and Dumber that made me think that this upcoming Kentucky Derby might be important to the Mandela effect theme again. Another interesting thing is that Medina Spirit, right? Medina Spirit, it died on December 6th of 2021. December 6th just so happens to be the same day that Donald Trump declared Jerusalem as the capital of Israel in 2017 as well. So there is some weird relationship to how it all interrelates back to this same theme and touching the Western Wall, and how it links back to Russia and Ukraine. Another interesting thing in relation to 424 with Russia, Ukraine, and Trump touching the Western Wall is that Russia actually invaded Ukraine 4 months and 24 days before Nelson Mandela's birthday. So 4 months and 24 days after Vladimir Putin's birthday, they invaded Ukraine, and then they also invaded Ukraine 4 months, 24 days before Nelson Mandela's birthday. And if you go from Nelson Mandela's birthday to Vladimir Putin's birthday, it's 2 months and 19 days. That big number with the horse thing, 219. And I mean, the list of 424 goes on and on and on and on. There's all kinds of stuff. Ivana Trump, she died 4 months and 24 days after her birthday in 2022. That guy, Lev Parnas, that said Donald Trump was like the messiah of Ukraine, he got sentenced to jail 4 months and 24 days after his birthday. There's all kinds of stuff with 424 and how it links back to Donald Trump. Just a million things with him. But there's something going on with the father symbolism too. I've talked about this father symbolism previously. And, you know, Toby Keith had the horse in the Kentucky Derby as well. And that father stuff had to do with the dream theme. And a big piece of that had to do with the year 2022 as well. And my dad's name equals 424. And my dad was synced up to Toby Keith dying and such. But I'm just bringing that up because, you know, Omaha Beach and D-Day is 6/6. And a bunch of the father stuff that I've talked about with the priests and the priest and Erling dying, and how it's related to the movie The Ritual coming out on 6/6, and how I think it's connected to the volcano symbolism. All that stuff with Toby Keith and my dad was about 66, which, I don't know, just makes me think about the date 6/6. Maybe there's something important to that date as well. I guess I never even looked either. Maybe one of them horse races falls on 6/6 or something. I don't even know what day 6/6 is. Oh, what am I? Stupid June. Well, it's on a Friday, so it wouldn't be the horse race. But the next day, possibly one of the horse races, the Belmont or whatever it is. Yeah, that falls the very next day. So maybe, I don't know, maybe there'll be some weird synchronicity that happens on June 6th that's related to this horse race. Or something of the sort. We will see, but I know all of this same stuff. It's crazy, but I know all of this same stuff is somehow related to why I recently made that video about the way people are decoding as well. And the reason I know this is because when I was looking back at my posts around the time of the Russia invading Ukraine and such, I noticed that the first time I ever watched a sports Gematria video just so happened to be on the same day that Russia invaded Ukraine. And I mean, for years, I've known that Zach twists his words and makes it seem like he's doing all these things, and he lies a lot. So it was no surprise when I found these videos, but I think these videos actually kind of inspired me to just not really care anymore. Like, to just speak my thoughts and go with it and don't worry about if Zach gets mad. Because I don't know why I ever did anyway, but I really did. And I know a lot of people feel that same way because he'll attack you and everything else for just not thinking the same way he does, or, you know. And there's obvious reasons why I'm trying to show people the way he is decoding is not, it doesn't actually prove a ritual. And I feel like I made the point in the last video, and I made another video the same way back in 2023. You know, it's not proving, just because you can align something up to the numbers of the Jesuits or the Freemasons, it doesn't prove that it's some ritual that's going on. And there's also this umbrella symbolism that is absolutely linked up to the truth community. And like I said, I feel like the truth community was created on purpose, and they have done things to lead us down a path to have beliefs such as everything is the Jesuits. And one of the examples that I used in this rebuttal video that I made to Zach that got instantly deleted on YouTube, I mean, the video wasn't even up for 5 minutes and YouTube took it down. I was making it in relation to a video Zach had made talking crap about my salsa synchronicity, which made 0 sense at all. You know, like, he was like making it look stupid, but nothing of what he was talking about had anything to do with why I was talking about the synchronicity I had with salsa. I never once said that it equaled 56 and I could blame the salsa bottle instead of the Jesuits. Just watch this video. It had nothing to do with the way Zach portrayed it. You know, he tried to make it look stupid. But one of the examples that I gave in this video was the example of how I had synchronicity at 2:22 in the morning on 2/22/22 with the horse stuff, right? And how I thought that maybe there might be an importance to Wendy Williams, and then the Wendy Williams show got canceled later in that day. And I pointed out how it was 219 days after her birthday, the day that was important to the horse symbolism. And she was also born the same day as Nelson Mandela. And the point was that, you know, if anybody else like Zach would have saw the story, not knowing this horse narrative whatsoever that I'm following, they would have said that her birthday was 18/7, which meant Society of Jesus. And since it was 219 days after her birthday, that would mean Roman Catholic. Roman Catholic, right? And then it was also 7 months and 4 days after her birthday. And you could write things like Jesus equals 74, cross, Messiah, gospel. Masonic, just any way to blame it on the Jesuits. But the point is, the thing that I was following it with had absolutely nothing to do with the Jesuits. It was all about this Mandela effect theme with horses. And then once again, Wendy Williams was in the news and got her show canceled. Had nothing to do with the Jesuits. And this is what people are doing constantly. They're taking these, dates and numbers, and they're just instantly connecting them to things with the Jesuits and the Freemasons, but there's no real actual proof that they are absolutely coding these to that story. Especially when I'm talking about something that has nothing to do with it, and then there's a story in the news exactly connected to what I'm talking about. It doesn't prove that the Jesuits are behind all of these stories. Just like in I don't remember what year it was, but my friend from Tampa was back in town, and he's actually married to John Bon Jovi's cousin. And then a few days later, I had a bunch of stuff with Tampa come back up. So I made a blog post talking about how I think there might be something important to John Bon Jovi. And because, when I was at the bar with my friend when he was back, he was talking about how John Bon Jovi's mother was in the hospital because she was really sick or whatever. And, no big deal, but we were at the bar. We even talked about John Bon Jovi. His wife is a first cousin of John Bon Jovi. And then 54 days after my blog post, John Bon Jovi was in the news for getting coronavirus. And, if you read out John Bon Jovi, his name equals 54. And his name also equals 222. And he got coronavirus 222 days before his cousin's birthday, the girl that I'm talking about. And her name equals 222. And my friend's name, his name equals 222. It's so it was connected to what I was talking about. But everybody else would have wrote Jesuit order. Because Bon Jovi's name equals 54, like Jesuit order. How does that prove the Jesuits are remotely responsible just because it's a story in the news about Bon Jovi and his name equals the same as Jesuit order? Every time he's in the news, then, that means Jesuit order, apparently. It's just there's no, substance behind the way people are decoding. And, I don't even think Zach even decoded it that way, but later, in 2024, Bon Jovi's mom died on July 9th, 2024. Bon Jovi's mother ended up dying, and Zach wrote, since she died at the age of 83 on 7/9, that means murder, because murder equals 79 and 83. I was and then he wrote about how John Bon Jovi equals the same as Jesuit order, and whatever. It's okay, are they really murdering an 83-year-old on 7/9? She died 83 days after, or not 83 days, but the girl, my friend's wife, her birthday's the 83rd day of the year. Maybe it was something to do with my friend's wife. You know what I mean? It's just stupid to always put in these phrases and say everything means the Jesuits when there's no actual proof. And you could say, oh, well, these are famous people, and when they're in the news, they're manipulating everyone's minds, and this is just your synchronicity. Yeah, but remember in 2015, there was the story where it was the headline story about the principal who got shot in South Dakota at Harrisburg High School? That was my aunt's brother. He really got shot. I met this guy. He legit got shot in the elbow. And he's not a Freemason. He's not a Jesuit of any of the sort. But since that shooting was at Harrisburg High School, people say Harrisburg equals 58. And if you look up my aunt's brother, his birthday was 58 days after the cop in the story's birthday, right? 10/10 to whatever it was, 12/7. Him and the cop's birthdays were 58 days apart. The school's name equaled 58. The kid who shot him was Mason Buell. So everyone would say, oh, it's the Masons behind this story, and his name even equals 33. The numbered Freemasonry. 105, like how you could write out Masonry. 48, like how Freemason equals 48. And the guy who got shot was Kevin Lynn, whose name equals 47. So that means the Freemason compass and whatever. But once again, this guy is not a Freemason. He's not a Jesuit. He really did get shot. That was the headline story on the news. It wasn't a hoax. It wasn't just some made-up story. It just doesn't make any sense. The cop's name was Sam Clemens as well. Sam Clemens, that equals 58. I didn't know reverse at the time of that story, but, the cop was Sam Clemens, Harrisburg equals 58, and everyone would have decoded it as this. Freemasonry equals 58. But there's no real proof. They're just throwing in numbers, trying to make a narrative by your belief. And I mean, sure, it's interesting that the kid's name was Mason, and you can make a narrative and make it fit to the Freemasons and so on, and use that as your foundation to understand the pattern. But it doesn't prove that they are responsible for that pattern. Absolutely. Just like how it doesn't prove that Nelson Mandela is the reason why all the stuff I follow with Wendy Williams has to do with. It doesn't prove Nelson Mandela is responsible for it. It's just you're showing a pattern that's connected this way. And you can use that pattern to see future events, because Gematria is actually a divination technique that is used within Kabbalah, Studying the meaning of names is also a divination technique. Studying the calendar stuff. It's not Gematria, it's a divination technique. That's why I said it was arithmancy. So, basically, it's just funny to me that I would put that video out the day after the Kentucky Derby this year. And then I realized that the first ever Sports Gematria video that I've ever watched was related to that. And, it's all related back to the Kentucky Derby, especially with Wendy Williams. That was the day of that Wendy Williams synchronicity. And what's funny is if you go and watch this video on BitChute, the one that got taken down by YouTube right away, if you read through all the comments, Zach left me all these crazy comments, being a dickhead or whatever. And it's like, one of the big ones was, the whole thing you went on about with Wendy Williams was pure mental illness. I was like, what? So he's even talking about how the Wendy Williams stuff was pure mental illness? Even though I even wrote how I thought something important with Wendy Williams was coming up. And then Wendy Williams' show gets canceled. That's just pure mental illness somehow. But what he does is connect everything to the Jesuits, and that's not mental illness. I mean, get out of here. But it's funny that now I released this video, and then I find out the sovereignty was born on 2/22/22, the same day I have the synchronicity with Wendy Williams. And that it was so crazy that exactly 2 years later after that synchronicity, we had another story on 2/22, 2 years to the day, that Wendy Williams was diagnosed with aphasia and dementia. 2 years exactly later on 2/22/22/24. And just before that, I was blogging about a thing with the Mandela effect and Morgan Freeman with Johnny Broom. And think about how Auburn was important to the basketball tournament this year as well with Johnny Broom. And the big thing was Bats Away, right? Morgan Freeman was all connected to Batman. His granddaughter had died, and they showed him at the Batman premiere the same month that Donald Trump said he was Batman at the Iowa State Fair, that linked all the way back to the 2019 Tisha B'Av, with Slipknot playing for the first time at the Iowa State Fair during Tisha B'Av. Honestly, the only reason I even made this recent video is just because I started making videos again recently. Because a long time ago when this video I got a strike on YouTube, and they took it down with less than 5 minutes of being up on YouTube. I got a strike. They hate Zach so much, apparently, yet they delete my video, responding to his video. They just completely delete it before it's even up. There's no way they watch the video. And it just doesn't make any sense. But I got a YouTube strike. I don't want to lose my channel, so I had to wait 3 months to start making videos because I didn't want to get a second strike. So I kind of just waited around. Then I kind of just got unmotivated. I wasn't making that many more videos. And recently I've started making a video almost every week. And, I blogged about the stuff with Chaotic Truth back in December. I've wanted to talk about this forever. And I kind of wanted to make another video kind of like this just to prove my point. That not everything is the Jesuits and not everything is connected to the Jesuits. And the funny part about this Cliffy salsa too, I'm going to go into detail with it a little bit, but this Cliffy salsa that Zach is talking about and trying to make it look stupid and so on, the reason I was even talking about Cliffy salsa was because in 2019 in April, I was noticing a pattern in the news. There was a bunch of stories about cliffs, right? That's why I thought it was funny earlier in the video when I had noticed that I talked about Cliff Clavin being on Jeopardy when I was talking about the Mandela effect stuff right before the 2019 Kentucky Derby. But there were stories in the news like Cliff from the TV show Dallas had died. And when you read about the TV show, it was known for its cliffhangers. And there was a story of like a girl fell off a cliff or something. Like Kevin Durant's best childhood friend named Cliff Dixon had died. So there was a bunch of stuff with cliffs. And on April 25th, 2019, I went to work after talking about all these cliff stuff. I went to work and my coworker Paula said that she brought me some salsa to try. It was like some salsa that her husband-in-law or something makes and he sells, so she brought it. And when I went into the cooler to look at it or to grab it, I noticed it was called Cliffy's. And I was like, what are the odds that this salsa is called Cliffy's after I'm blogging about all these stories with a cliff theme? And you know what's funny is the day after Zach made the video talking crap about my Cliffy's salsa, one of the headline stories in the news was about a story of a girl who fell off a cliff. And then my coworker Paula, who had been retired for almost a whole year before that, and she had never came and visited ever the whole year, the day after Zach made that video, she came into the store and she was wearing a shirt with an umbrella on it. I was like, what are the odds of that? I'm talking about the umbrella symbolism and how it's related to this. You know, and then Taylor Swift was also big in the news for going to the Chiefs game on that same day Zach made the video. If you go back and look at all my stuff with Taylor Swift, a big thing with her had to do with the umbrella symbolism in this video called Me that she made. And it was everybody floating around on umbrellas. That video released on April 25th, the same day that I had the Cliffy salsa sync, the same day that the Umbrella Man made the video about the number 166. That was 166 days after my birthday. And then the very next day, the lady Mary Toffelmeyer called in, whose name equaled 166. And she said that the Umbrella Man was trying to hurt her pet pig. And I was sitting next to two stuffed animal pigs that my daughter called her pets, that I was supposed to watch while she went to bed that night. You know, what are the odds of all that? And then in the video where Zach was making fun of my salsa, later in the video, he randomly started talking about some lady in Hawaii and her pet pig. And it had absolutely no context to do with my video. It was like, so why are you even bringing up some lady with a pet pig? It links back to the umbrella symbolism, the exact same thing that I'm talking about. This Cliffy salsa Synchronicity links back to the exact same day that I had the thing with the Umbrella Man. The whole thing I'm talking about is all about how the truth community is being controlled and led down paths, and this umbrella symbolism represents mind control. That's why Dr. Paul Cottrell, the guy who went to the Jesuit University, and he's the one who got a hold of you about the event 201 while you're staying at room 201 in Louisiana that equals 201, right? He went to a Jesuit university, and then after that, everything was the Jesuits. All the 201s in the news, Anthony Fauci. It's like they programmed you to believe that everything was the Jesuits. I don't know how you can't understand that. Because I think, considering this truth community was obviously controlled and created on purpose, it's not that hard to see. I think there's something greater that is controlling all of this, you know. Just like I said, how in the movie The Matrix, they allow certain people to be awake, but they're really not really awake because the robots still control and they know where they are and they destroy them every year and they create a new or every 100 years and they create a new Matrix and so on. So I'm saying even if you think you're at the level of Gematria and you're just more awake than everybody, you're still being controlled, you know? This is why I think it's not the Jesuits. It's something deeper than the Jesuits that we don't know about, that wants us to have this belief because they are controlling us and leading us down this path. And then everybody keeps taking these phrases and words that are associated with the Jesuits and then putting them in every story, even if the story's nothing to do with a Jesuit or the Catholic Church or anything. They're just finding a way to make it fit. But, of course, Zach didn't show any of that in his newest video, talking about the umbrella symbolism and why I think that it's not the Jesuits. He showed the first half of the video where I was talking about all these things that other people say about Gematria and why they don't believe in it. and such, and I was saying why I can identify with that, because a lot of the things are inconsistent. But obviously I use Gematria, and it's not just Gematria that I'm using, but, it is a divination technique, which is called, numerology, arithmancy. You're not really exposing other people's mysticism. You are using your own mysticism by blaming everything on the cabal. And that is your foundation to understand the pattern. That is what I'm talking about. And I mean, I'm just going on this rant because it makes sense with the horse narrative, right? That I actually put that video out there. I didn't even know of these connections until later. So it's just funny that I would actually do this, and it's all related, it's all purposeful. But once again, just let's give an example here. Conclave. So the conclave began on May 7th, right? And this is the blog post that Zach has. How conclave. I mean, it's interesting. It began on May 7th, which we're at the Vatican, they would write the date 7/5, like conclave, like Catholic Church, like Roman Catholic. But once again, if you look at the history of conclaves, they don't all sync up to this pattern. They don't all even sync up to the four base ciphers of Gematria, The conclave of Pope Francis began on March 12th. Why doesn't conclave equal 312 or 123 or whatever, It makes sense. Maybe they did have this newest one on May 7th because the word conclave. It's possible. I'm not saying that they didn't do that on purpose. But other people who are looking at this, they're going to look at all the other conclaves and they're going to go, well, why didn't Pope Francis's conclave sync up to this? Why didn't Pope Benedict's conclave sync up to this same pattern? Why didn't Pope John Paul II's conclave sync up to this same pattern? You found a connection and you just started putting in these words. Same with even, it is interesting. Pope Francis equals 58. And, the new Pope equals 58. And they selected him on 5/8. And a bunch of other stuff that was written about 58. That's interesting. But once again, it didn't work that way when Pope Francis became the Pope. It didn't work that way when Pope Benedict became the Pope. You connected it to white smoke. White smoke, and I can't even remember what the thing was, but let me just find it really quick. White smoke. So white smoke equals 52, like Pope, and it was 142 days after Pope Francis's birthday, and white smoke equals 142. Go back in history and look at all of the other times the Pope was selected. It didn't sync up that same way. So it's interesting, it is, that white smoke equals that. It's interesting that there's white smoke when they elect a new Pope and Pope equals 52 like white smoke. I will give you that. But since it doesn't connect to all of the other times that it is connected to the Pope being elected, you can't say that they are specifically choosing white smoke to code it this time, but they didn't choose it like a million other times. It just doesn't make that much sense to connect it that way. Even though it is interesting and you can connect it, you can't prove that it was some ritual that they did it that way when it doesn't connect to all the other years. But once again, it is every time there is a new Pope, it's white smoke, right? And that equals the same as Pope. So that makes sense. That was probably white smoke equals 52, probably on purpose because Pope equals 52. But you can't force the connection with Pope Francis when it's not connected the same way all the other times, And there's always going to be a narrative, like the conclave or whatever this. The conclave began on 5/7, right? Or 7/5. If the conclave would have began on May 2nd, you would have wrote the word Pope. You would have wrote that it began because Pope equals 52 and Kabbalah and the 52-week calendar. And I don't even know. It was, let's see here. The conclave began, let's go to 5/2. 7 months and 5 days after the Jesuit anniversary, So that would have meant conclave equals 75, Roman Catholic 75, Catholic Church 75. Why didn't they do it on this day? That day would have been just as perfect. You can make a narrative for literally any day. You know what I mean? You could have did, if it was on May 3rd, if it was on May 3rd, you would have said religion equals 53. And then you would have flipped it to 3/5, like how Catholic equals 35. Then it would have been 218 days after the Jesuit anniversary, and Holy Roman Empire equals 218. And then you maybe you would have measured from Arturo Sosa's birthday. I don't know. Oh, his birthday's the 12th. Hold on. Arturo Sosa's birthday. It was 6 months and 9 days before Arturo Sosa's birthday. And Catholic Church equals 69. Arturo Sosa equals 69, you know? It doesn't matter what day it's on. You're going to find a connection. May 4th. May 4th would have been the Jesuit order equals 54, right? And that would also mean that May 4th was 219 days after the Jesuit anniversary, right? 219, and Roman Catholic equals 219. And, you know, let's go back to Arturo Sosa's birthday and measure again. So this would have been 6 months and 8 days before Arturo Sosa's birthday, the Jesuit Superior General. And 68 would be Catholicism, or a span of 6 months and 9 days to make it Catholic Church, you know. And then you'd also probably say something like, I mean, I'm just saying, this is how easy it is to decode what you're doing. You're just making it fit, you know. Since it was 5-4, that means sun, the word sun, and the Jesuits have the sun rays on their logo. And May 4th is a span of 139 days after Pope Francis's birthday. So that means Freemasonry, and Pope Francis did the hidden hand pose. So he's the Freemason, and it's in May, so it's under the May sun. Like I'm telling you, it doesn't matter what day. There's a narrative for every single day. You're going to have a narrative, you know. If the conclave began on May 5th, you would have wrote how Satan equals 55, and how Pope Francis, they had the 9 days of mourning, which was 9 days before the anniversary of the Church of Satan, and Church of Satan was their 59th anniversary, and Pope Francis equals 59, and Pope Benedict stepped down on the 59th day of the year. But this day, if you went to the Jesuit founding date and, you know, you looked at it, oh, it's 7 months and 8 days. Like how the word Jesuit equals 78. I mean, there's no explanation of why. You know what I mean? Oh, just because. 220 could also be connected to Pope Francis as well, because the Jesuits were created with the 220th Pope. Hell, you might even measure from the day the Jesuits were created. And it was 263 days. That's the 56 prime number. And Society of Jesus equals 56. And, you know, I don't even know. Let's go back to Arturo Sosa's birthday again. Arturo Sosa. Oh, it was 191 days before his birthday. Society of Jesus equals 191. It's also 6 months and 7 days. The word satanic equals 67. You know, the Pope was dead 67 days after he got hospitalized. The film Conclave released on the day leaving 67 days in the year. And then it would be blood sacrifice, human sacrifice, you know? Once again, always a date that it could have happened on. I'm just making the point. May 6th, right? May 6th, another day. Society of Jesus equals 56. You know, why didn't they do it on these days? Would have made sense to do it on this day too, because Pope equals 56, right? I mean, Arturo Sosa's birthday, 175 days after Arturo Sosa's birthday, Pope Francis equals 175. Then you go to the Jesuit anniversary, right? No, the Jesuit anniversary to 5-6. 7 months and 9 days, like how Society of Jesus equals 79. It was also 144 days before the Jesuit anniversary. 144, like Jesuit order. 4 months, 21 days, like how Pope Francis died on 4/21. I mean, the point is, why didn't they choose any of these other days? You know what I'm saying? Like, what is the purpose? Like, it could have been any of these other days. May 8th even, right? The conclave could have begun on May 8th. And, He would have wrote Pope Francis equals 58. Freemasonry equals 58. He had the hidden hand pose, and, it's under the May sun, and this was 177 days after Arturo Sosa's birthday, right? Which 177 means the Jesuit order. And that means it's 188 days before Arturo Sosa's birthday, like Bavarian Illuminati. Or if you go to Pope Francis's birthday, that would have been another good day to have it on. Because 5/8 was 7 months and 9 days before Pope Francis's birthday, like Society of Jesus. You see the point I'm making? It doesn't matter what day it falls on. You have so many programmed words and phrases and dates to link up to, you will always find a pattern that exists. And I'm not saying there's not a cabal, because I really think there is, but I think that cabal wants us to have this belief, and I think they purposely put 201s and stuff in stories to make people follow through with that belief that everything is the Jesuits. I don't understand how that's so hard to understand. And it is interesting, Like I said, I'm not uninterested that conclave equals 75 and they have it on 7/5 where the Vatican is and so on. You can make the connection, but it doesn't prove there was a ritual, especially when you compare it to all of the other conclaves that don't connect to them same patterns. And it seems like Zach's always trying to downplay the synchronicity and stuff. I mean, yeah, you might talk about it the tiniest bit. You always say, oh, life is strange, and then you move on with it. It's like, like Cooper Cup's grandpa ends up buying your house after the Super Bowl was super connected to you. Or like, what about how your sister's father died on August 11th, 2019? This humongous day that you were pushing and everybody in the Gematria truth community was following. And, nothing really that big happened on that day. Well, like we thought. A few things, you could connect to it. But your sister's father died on that day and that was never, ever brought up. I find that crazy, How was that never, ever brought up? Why is it always being downplayed, the things in your life and how they're related to the news, And then you look at all the times that Zach lies. He lies so much that I think he actually believes his own lies. It's crazy. And then you start thinking about the umbrella symbolism, and then you start going, is Zach just here to control the minds of the masses and make everybody who finds Gematria follow these patterns and believe that everything is some cabal, and that way they don't pay attention and learn more about the actual, the use of Kabbalah and Gematria? It makes you really wonder, Especially when every time I make an umbrella video like that, it gets a strike or taken down a lot of times. It always creates chaos. And it's weird. It's not just with Zach, Zach kind of came out of nowhere wearing his sunglasses and always wore his stocking hat up on the top of his head like a Jewish guy, which I always thought was weird. But, kind of comes out of nowhere. All these big channels on YouTube know who he is. Enter the Stars also got mad at one of my umbrella videos. Remember, Enter the Stars had a car crash through his house in 2016. Dabu7 had a car crash. Maybe it wasn't through his house, but it was in his yard or something. Enter the Stars is. And then Dabu7 had the same thing. And then Zach's garage got crashed into after the Umbrella Man threatened him. There's a lot of weird things going on there. And maybe that's nothing. Maybe that means nothing. And maybe none of these people are part of it. But I've always thought that was interesting. And it's all linked to the umbrella symbolism. And Enter the Stars has even got mad at me on one of my umbrella videos. So it's just interesting how these umbrella videos seem to create chaos within these communities. But then you look at all the 33 around Zach as well. All that 33 I showed in the video. I mean, it's interesting. It's an interesting thought that possibly, maybe he doesn't even realize it, but they are manipulating his mind to keep people in this lower level of understanding because they don't want people to understand more. And in relation to Sports Gematria, like I said, you can go look at Sports Gematria's videos. Find Sports Gematria. He's not chopping things up and making it look like Zach's lying. He's straight up showing all of the times tons of the times that Zach has lied and said that he predicted something and he didn't. Or, he might have predicted it, but he also predicted the exact opposite thousands of times. And then when it landed, he said it was that he had predicted it or whatever. It's not even just with sports, it's with elections and, other things, saying that Joe Biden was going to leave office and all kinds of stuff. And if you go back to like this BitChute video that I had to put on there, in one of the comments, because I talked about how Zach shares this video where he was in his garage. He often shares this video where he predicted that Donald Trump would be the president in 2016 in February, and then the light flickered in his garage or whatever, and whatever, just, it's the light flicker video or whatever, but the moral of the story is Zach often shows that video to make it look like he predicted Donald Trump. And he's even said numerous times that he predicted Donald Trump to be the president that year. Yet right after that video, he started following Hillary Clinton, and there's thousands of blog posts and videos showing that Zach said that Hillary Clinton was going to be the president, not Donald Trump. But for some reason, he always shares that video trying to make it look like he actually predicted Donald Trump to be the president. See if I could find that here. Look at this. And I always say I came off the Donald Trump prediction. So what the fuck are you talking about? This was from 2 years ago, right after I made this video, right? In October of 2023. He says he always tells people he came off the Donald Trump prediction. Yet, you can go look at some of these videos, like, he posted this video. I've always told people, right? But he posted this video on December 17th, 2021, and he reposted the video. And then he even tagged in the comments, "The trolls like to say I never predicted Trump would be president. Just remember the trolls are always lying about the truth and resume of correct calls. It's because of that, it's because that resume is so good that they're here. So the trolls are there because he predicted Donald Trump, but the trolls say he never predicted Donald Trump. Yet over here he's telling me that he always says he came off the Donald Trump prediction. And what's even more messed up, his recent video, right after I had talked about that in the video, he reshared the video, right? October 6th, 21 hours ago. He shared this video again, making it seem like he picked Donald Trump. So, I mean, why would he comment that? I always tell people I come off the Donald Trump prediction. And then he shares the video where it makes it look like he predicted Donald Trump. It's just ridiculous. The guy lies so much that he actually believes his own lies. And of course, if you go back and look at this video here, when the light did the crazy thing, it was 1 minute and 12 seconds into the video. Go watch this video. 1 minute and 12 seconds into the video. The word light equals 112, and it was 112 days, a span of 112 days before Donald Trump's birthday. So, I mean, once again, if he would have been paying attention to synchronicity, he would have caught that it was 112 in the video, 112 days before Trump's birthday. The word light equals 112. Maybe he wouldn't have caught the light thing because light, I think it's in the Francis Bacon cipher, but even so, yeah, it is. The Francis Bacon cipher is 112, but 112 days before Trump's birthday and 1 minute and 12 seconds into the video. And then later that year, the car crashes into his garage, It's interesting, right? Car crashes into his garage later that year. I mean, plus the person he was trying to show this video to equals 186, which is a big number with the umbrella symbolism. Light bulb equals 186. All kinds of stuff here. And it's often like everything's a murder because of the song Murder by Numbers, right? But once again, why people always forget that song was on the album Synchronicity 2, right? Why are we always omitting the part about synchronicity and downplaying synchronicity and trying to make it look stupid? Well, actually, it was on Synchronicity 1, but why are we downplaying synchronicity all of the time and making it look stupid and then trying to make everything into a murder and so on? And Murder by Numbers is on the album called Synchronicity. Wouldn't that be something that we should be paying attention to, something of importance. It's just so weird that it always gets so downplayed. And then it's like, well, that's just stupid, but everything is the Jesuits, you know? And it's like, what? I mean, I predicted John Rahm would win the Masters in 2023 because of Zach kicking Rambo off the Gematria Effect episode on the Ides of March. And I had an old post about Rambo and John Rahm, and it was all linked to what was going on. So I started looking into Rambo, and Rambo was super synced up to the Masters that year. It was all connected to him getting kicked off the Gematria Effect episode, and so on. And then John Rahm ended up winning the Masters, all linked to that, you know. I even bet on it. I have a bet slip to prove that I bet on it. Meanwhile, Zach was showing everybody that John Rahm did it because of the Freemasons or some shit. I was like, well, what? You know, it's just ridiculous. Was it the Freemasons, or was it because of my synchronicity, or me noticing the pattern with you kicking Rambo off, you know? It just, there's no proof either way, you know? It is mysticism. A few more things that I'm going to end the video, but these things are just interrelated into the horse symbolism. And in this recent video where Zach was trying to discredit me or whatever, he writes, another gas station attendant attempts to debunk Gematria. And he's talking about Cuts One, who also works at a gas station. And I've addressed this in the other video here on BitChute, why I work at a gas station. I mean, I have a bachelor's degree. I had a 4.0 in college. I choose to work at the gas station for specific reasons. You know, I live in a small town. I don't want to drive an hour to go get a great job or some crap like that. I enjoy my job and so on. Tons of stuff. I choose to work at the gas station because money isn't everything in the world, you know. But, and there's lots of benefits of working there. My kids can come in and visit and all kinds of stuff. But, and I also don't weigh 400 pounds. I don't even know what he's even talking about. Like here's a recent picture on Facebook of me. Do I look like I weigh 400 pounds? I'm like a big person. I'm 6'4". It's like, I don't weigh 400 pounds. Not even close. You know, I'm a little bit overweight. Yes, I have a beer belly. But am I 400, like some 400 pound slob? No, I'm not a 400 pound slob. You know, like that. I feel like I was being made out to be in that video. And nothing with my Uncle Barney had to do with cheese sandwiches. Nothing. You know, it's just the whole thing is just ridiculous. But, you know, it's not my fault that Zach hasn't grown since 5th grade or whatever. I don't know. But, you know, I'm actually a pretty big dude in general. Nothing to do with being severely overweight. But the whole thing about the gas station attendant stuff, he's saying that we got the word arithmancy. I'm assuming it's the word arithmancy, because I've seen Cuts say it before too. But he's saying that we got that from Harry Potter. And it's like, I've never even seen Harry Potter before, ever. I watched the first half of a movie once. I even blogged about it with my daughter, but then it like froze up. And I never watched any of the movies ever again. I never finished watching that movie. I've never read the books. I had no idea that Harry Potter even talks about arithmancy. I found the word arithmancy when I was researching about Gematria within the English language and how it relates to, you know, English Kabbalah, and is actually arithmancy. That is the real thing. That is the real use of what you're talking about with Gematria. It is actually arithmancy using the English language and such. It's numerology. But the funny thing about the reference to Harry Potter is the fact that I have a blog post where I'm talking about the umbrella symbolism from 2022, and around that same time there was a whole bunch of stuff with the horse symbolism again, and Harry, the guy who plays Harry Potter, Daniel Radcliffe, he's actually in this movie that's, I can't even remember what it's about. He's in a movie that is about a horse that's blind and whatever. That there was a whole, I have a whole video on it. I'll leave a little picture and a thing in the video here, but you know, the Harry Potter guy was linked up to horse symbolism with how he was going to portray Weird Al and such. So I just find that funny that there's even a connection to Harry Potter and horses. And it went back to Rihanna, and Rihanna has like the video Umbrellas, right? Or the Umbrella song. Rihanna also has that video called Diamonds, where she brings a horse back to life. And Rihanna's from Barbados, that has the flag with the trident on it, which is Neptune or Poseidon, who is the god of horses and earthquakes. But all of this linked back to in October 2022 when I put a video out about the umbrella symbolism on October 11th, and then the video got taken down and I got a strike. And oddly enough, Enter the Stars had a video that same day where he used an umbrella, the same umbrella logo. It was of Penguin from Batman or whatever. He used that same one. And I didn't even know about that. And I found out about it from Zenith a few days later on October 17th. But that video that I had that was deleted, it was 2 years and 19 days after an umbrella video I put out on September 8th, 2020. And that was the umbrella video where Enter the Stars had left me a comment. And I also found out about that thing from Zenith of the Alpha 2 years, 1 month, and 9 days after that day. So 219, that important number with the horse symbolism in relation to the Mandela effect. And it's interesting too, next year is going to be the year of the horse in relation to Chinese astrology and stuff. So maybe there's something important to that. You know, I talked about how I thought Prince Philip would possibly die in the year 2021, which is the year of the ox, because the word Philip means lover of horses, and it was the ox and the horse are the greatest enemies in Chinese astrology. And then Prince Philip ended up dying, and he died in relation to that volcano symbolism. There was a big volcano eruption the same day that he died. And my friend Phil, who actually loves horses, he got injured in a ATV accident that summer during the year of the ox as well. And now he's paralyzed or whatever. And his name's Phil, and he loves horses, and he was injured during the year of the ox. And ironically, my girlfriend now goes out and takes care of him 7 days a week, every night for like 2 hours, and helps him get into bed and stuff. But, you know, in relation to this, the Tisha B'Av narrative, I'm telling you, there's something going on with the Tisha B'Av and how it relates to how the truth community was following August 11th, 2019. And when I was looking at the stuff with Harry Potter here again, and how it related to the horse theme, I noticed I had a blog post where Zach mentioned that his sister's father died on August 11th, 2019. He didn't mention this until 2022. It's just interesting because that seems like it would be a really big thing to talk about in relation to how the whole truth community was following that date. And then, you know, his sister's father dies on that day. And I've recently talked about how Pope Francis was related to the father symbolism, and Zach making the video about Joseph Aquaviva and Mark Passio's fathers dying, and how all of that was related to the number 421. And then Zach on February 3rd ended up doing the live stream with a guy named American Fathers, right? And that guy's birthday was June 24th. And Zach did that live stream with him 4 months and 21 days before his birthday. American Fathers. What's so interesting is that then we got the new Pope. Let's see if I put it in here. Well, look, I even pointed out Pope Francis' father when I was talking about Zach doing the live stream with this guy named American Fathers, right? Even highlighted Pope Francis B. Day, father. All these 421s. But the interesting thing about it is the new Pope was American father. And if you go from his birthday to the day Zach did a live stream with a guy named American Fathers, just so happened to be 4 months and 21 days. 421. Like the day that Pope Francis died. You know, all this father symbolism. And I think somehow that's related back to this August 11th Tisha B'Av thing where Zach's sister's father had died. And he even mentions it in this video because Arthur, or Simple Truth, was talking about how his father died when he was 9 years old. And remember, all the father symbolism, it has to do with a dream that Enter the Stars had and a dream that I had. And it all had to do with the number 9, and it was 9 days before the FIU bridge collapse. And then you think about August 11th, Tisha B'Av, and the Golden Gate Bridge, and how the Golden Gate Bridge was in San Francisco, and it links up to Pope Francis, who's named after St. Francis of Assisi, just like San Francisco, and how next year we got the Super Bowl that's being held in San Francisco. Possibly it's even during the year of the horse. And then, Alcatraz, the connection to Alcatraz and August 11th, and Alcatraz outside of San Francisco. Donald Trump being the Messiah, and the Jews believe the Messiah will return through the Golden Gate. There seems to be this humongous narrative with how it's related to Tisha B'Av. I don't know how many times I got to say this, but I measured from Zach's father's birthday to August 11th, and it's 3 months and 24 days. And I've talked about this number a whole lot with Zach. I think there's something important to the 324, and I mentioned how I think it's important to Zach. So it's interesting. His father's birthday is 3 months, 24 days before August 11th. And if you go from his father's birthday to August 2nd, the day that Tisha B'Av begins this year, it's 3 months and 16 days. And this is a big number with Donald Trump. And this is even 316 days before Donald Trump's birthday. And it's also J.D. Vance's birthday. And remember, J.D. Vance synced to that volcano symbolism. And remember, Donald Trump's father died 3 months and 16 days after his birthday, or before one or the other. His father's symbolism had a lot to do with the number 316 as well. So it's interesting. Tisha B'Av begins 3 months, 16 days after Zach's father's birthday. And the old Tisha B'Av that I was talking about in relation to it was the day that his sister's father died, It's just interesting. I feel like there is a relationship there with it somehow. And even when I was writing up this blog post, all of a sudden I looked up at the TV and I saw this. The Simpsons were playing while my girlfriend and my 2 boys were sleeping on the bed up here. And I look up at the TV and it says Pope dead as I'm writing this blog post, And I looked up the episode and it came out on September 29th, 2019, the same year as the Tisha B'Av event that I'm talking about. And that synchronicity happened 4 months and 18 days before September 29th, the day this episode aired. Like how Zach's father is born on 4/18. Also 141 days, and that's interesting because the 141st prime number just so happens to be 811. And then when you link it into Pope Francis, the word pontiff means bridge builder, right? Think about the Golden Gate Bridge, how the Dream Father theme was synced up to bridge collapses. You just had the story of Zelensky of Ukraine and how he's going to meet with Putin on May 15th. And that's interesting because that's the day that Putin opened the Crimea Bridge. That American Fathers equals 141 and 316, linking up to them same numbers that I'm talking about with Tisha B'Av. And then think about American Fathers, and then think about that picture with Donald Trump looking like the Pope, right? The AI image. American Father. It's probably why we ended up getting an American Pope, right? But American Father. Tisha B'Av really synced up to that 316 number. It's J.D. Vance's birthday, synced up to Donald Trump, who technically could be an American father as well. And in relation to Russia and Ukraine, back when I was talking about that episode with Family Guy where Peter wants to box Vladimir Putin, and we got that story about how the media wanted Donald Trump to box Putin, right? He said the media wanted him to box Putin. There was a AI image, I think, that year, as 2019. Or there was an AI image in 2019 shared of Donald Trump looking like Rocky, right? The boxer. So that was a big old thing, and that all linked up to Thanksgiving and World War and such. But remember when Russia invaded Ukraine, it was all about boxing. You had the Klitschko brothers. You had Mike Tyson in the news saying he had some words for Putin. It was all linked up to Floyd Mayweather because the war began on Floyd Mayweather's birthday, and it was linked up to Conor McGregor. I have a whole bunch of videos on that, all linked up to this boxing narrative. So there's some interrelatedness with these AI pictures of Trump being the American father, and then Trump being also Rocky in boxing, which is linked up to Putin and Ukraine, and then Trump touches the Western Wall, and it's all linked up to the war in Israel that came on Vladimir Putin's birthday. It's super deep here. And Ukraine also equals 219, right? The big number with horses and the Mandela effect. Russia equals 141. Once again, the 141st prime number is 811. Tisha B'Av and the composite cipher, something I've been talking about, is important. That also equals 141. Plus the new pope being in the order of St. Augustine. Just the word Augustine makes me think of August, right? And then we got Tisha B'Av coming up. 2019, Tisha B'Av began on World Lion Day, which is also during the time of Leo in astrology. And now the new pope's name is Pope Leo. So there's something interesting there as well. Same with, it's also, Leo begins typically on Neptunalia, July 23rd. Remember, Neptune is the god of horses. And July 23rd is also Daniel Radcliffe's birthday, Harry Potter's birthday. Whole bunch of stuff that is connected to that, but I don't know. It seems like there's something important to them Tisha B'Av dates. So I'm going to pay attention to them dates in August. I'm going to pay attention to June 6th as well, D-Day with Omaha Beach. And we will see. But hopefully I made the point. It's just, I mean, there's so many interesting things. I can't believe that people think some of these things are uninteresting and whatever. I gotta go get my kids. Have a good one. Peace. Actually, I just want to say a few more things before I end this video. But I'm probably not going to make videos about this concept anymore. I actually realized that just by looking at all the people who still follow Zach, or the people who follow Zach, who are learning from him and doing things these ways, a lot of the people are people who I've never even heard of before. And, there's not a whole lot of people that have been around for a long time. So that tells you something right there. So other people are figuring it out and people are going their own way and so on. It's not my place to even worry about it, I guess. So I'm just going to do my own thing and just try to let it be. The problem is that a lot of the things that I'm following do involve Zach and other, truthers and so on in the patterns that I'm following. But, like I said, I don't disagree that there is a cabal. I don't disagree that there are probably rituals going on. Things like, remember how they had that, the song My Homies Still? Like back in 2012, My Homies Still by Lil Wayne came out. And it was in June 5th of 2012, just before the Batman shooting. If you watch that music video, there's the girl who looks like Batman. He even sings about the Illuminati. And then they have the 12 skeletons in the movie theater. And then the Batman movie theater gets shot up a month later, and then they point to Sandy Hook on the map. And then we get Hurricane Sandy, and the San Francisco Giants won the World Series that year. They used to be called the New York Gothams. Right, think about Gotham and Batman. Then we had the Rise of the Guardians with the Sandman and the main character with the hook. It was Sandy Hook. Then we got Sandy Hook. I'm pretty sure all of these things are rituals. The thing that I am talking about is the way people are decoding these things and placing in things that don't always make sense. It's not that every single piece of the decode is dumb or, not accurate or whatever. Like I said in the last video, Sandy Hook equals 112, and that's probably why Adam Lanza, they said he was born on the 112th day of the year, and he weighed 112 pounds, and his initials are even, A and L, like 1 and 12, But I mean, to start just plugging in phrases because you believe that it's the Catholic Church that is involved with that, it doesn't prove they're using them specific phrases. They might be coding a completely different phrase that you have absolutely no idea about. Or, they might just be using a certain combination of numbers that create magic somehow. Maybe they don't even have to be associated with a word or a phrase. And when people just start plugging in words and phrases, that's what I'm bitching about, Like Joe Biden getting cancer, right? And Joe Biden equals 44, and cancer equals 44. Okay, it makes sense, right? I'm not saying that's bad, but what I'm saying is when you start making that 44 mean some other random word that has nothing to do with the story, really, I'm not saying that there isn't a cabal. I mean, people just keep thinking that. I don't understand what people are Like, when I'm reading some of the comments, I'm like, it's just not registering in people's brains, and I don't know how better to explain it, But, like this blog post right here. So, Trump called Vladimir Putin today, right? And they started negotiations for a ceasefire, is what the story was earlier today. And then you read what Zach writes, and he writes, it's 114 days after Zelensky's birthday. Art of War. Okay, I guess I can sort of see why that makes sense to an extent, but also World War equals 114 and a bunch of other things. I can sort of understand the point of what he's writing there. But up here, like, it comes 224 days after Putin's 72nd birthday. How does that mean the Society of Jesus? Because that equals 224, and Jesuit order equals 72. Like, the story doesn't even have anything to do with the Jesuits, the Catholic Church. You're just placing in any phrase that fits to achieve your narrative and your belief with this story. I mean, it is possible they are choosing this specific phrase, but how do you know they're choosing this specific phrase because of the number 224? It's just because you have a list of all of these words and phrases that are associated with your belief of what is going on. It doesn't make any sense. Like, there's no, like, real substance. You can't explain why they are coding this specific phrase, because they're probably not coding that specific phrase. And once again, it could mean anything. Why isn't it, Russia invaded Ukraine on the date 224 even? That would make more sense to write. Why it's, 224, Russia invaded Ukraine on 224. If you go the other way, and then you think about all the things I talked about in this video, if you go the other way, it's 4 months and 18 days before Vladimir Putin's birthday. Remember, Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine a span of 4 months and 18 days after his birthday. 418 is this big number with Trump and a whole bunch of stuff, Also 141. This 418 is really big with the composite ciphers that I've explained over and over in the last how many videos. If you read out Russia and the composite cipher, Russia just so happens to equal 141 in the composite cipher. And remember, the 141st prime number is 811, and I was talking about how it's connected to the August 11th Tisha B'Av in this video. And, somebody else could make that 141 mean something completely different. And the things that they're talking about might show up in the news. They might connect it to Scooby-Doo somehow, and then in 3 days, maybe one of the actors in the Scooby-Doo movie will die or something, and then their name will equal 141. There's just no proof that they're coding this phrase specifically, or this phrase specifically. And sure, you can go back to the whole thing about the war in Israel popping off on Putin's 71st birthday, and it was connected to whatever it was, to Pope Francis and so on. But once again, I could make a narrative of why they would have did that on any other day, It would have made sense to actually do it 2 years before, when Vladimir Putin was 69 years old, like Catholic Church, and Donald Trump was 75 years old, like Catholic Church, and Pope Francis was 84 years old, like Jesuit, if you're going to connect it that way. I mean, there's just all these different ways when you have all of these different phrases to connect it. And it is by belief. And once again, that umbrella symbolism was leading us down a path to have that belief that everything is the Jesuits. And then people started decoding all of these things, always connected to this stuff, I mean, look at another thing. It just doesn't make sense to me. Today is 119 days after Donald Trump took office. So that means they're just coding the word Donald? It's like, why would they just code the word Donald? Why not code Donald Trump? Why, you just because Donald equals 119 and today is 119 days after he took office, it doesn't prove they're coding the word Donald. I don't understand how people don't see what I am saying. It doesn't make any sense to do that. There's just no proof that they're coding the word Donald, and why would they code just Donald and not Donald Trump, and so on. It doesn't make any sense to do. It's just, you're just making it fit, You're finding words and phrases to fit to the narrative. I mean, up here too, there was another story up here I saw earlier about the TikTok influencer's daughter or 3-year-old son drowns in a swimming pool, right? Trig Kaiser. And, apparently it means kill. But it's like this kid's name, or the lady's name, the TikTok influencer, her name equals 115, and somehow that just means killing. It's like the stories about their kid who drowned in a pool. There's literally no proof that this kid got murdered or killed. It doesn't make sense. And you're basing that on things like how TikTok equals 86, like blood sacrifice, like human sacrifice. It's like, what? But there's tons of people, tons of other influencers on YouTube and whatever else that don't die by these connections. How do you know it means, like, how do you know that these are all human sacrifices and a blood sacrifice just because TikTok equals 86, Like the word alive equals 86. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. You can't have fateful name gematria. TikTok has fateful gematria because TikTok equals 86. There's no substance behind what you're talking about there. So every person who dies that was an influencer on TikTok, you're going to write human sacrifice and blood sacrifice. You have no idea if that's true, but you're going to make it look like that's true. And it sways people who first get into this knowledge, and it keeps people interested, even though it doesn't make it true. Now, one thing that is interesting in here is the date that this kid drowned. It was on May 11th, which can be written 11/5, like 115. And this person's name equals 115. Okay, that actually has something to do with the story. You're not just placing in a word and a phrase. That is actually involved in the story. If the word drowning equaled 115, it would even make sense to write in there. But not, blood sacrifice and killing, and because you have no idea if this person got murdered or killed. You just don't have any clue. Trig also has fateful gematria. That's the first name of the kid who drowned. And trig equals 74 and 34, and murder equals 34. It's like, but why did they just choose the first name? I don't understand where people are, like, it doesn't make any sense. If the story was about this kid getting murdered by someone holding them down and drowning him in the pool, then I could see why you would write that. But even then, it's still weird, that they'd only use the one name instead of the other name. It's because it's confirmation bias, And I mean, he put drown in here. I guess I didn't even see that, but still. So I get that. That makes sense. Drown, right? Because the kid actually drowned. That makes sense to the story. The kid's name equals the same as swimming pool. Okay. If the kid drowned in a swimming pool, makes sense. Well, there's no proof the kid got murdered. Like, none whatsoever. It's just pure speculation and belief. So hopefully you understand the point that I'm making. If you don't understand it, I don't know. Whatever. I'm not going to worry about it anymore. I'm just going to go my own way, do whatever, But just once again, I just want people to think about the way they are decoding. And also, start paying attention to everything that goes on in your life and around you and your friends and your family. You're going to see that this exists everywhere, all of the time, every day. These same numbers and so on. And, when you compare it to the news stories, sure, we do get a lot of lies and programming in the news, but that doesn't prove that every single one of these stories is some story coded by the Jesuits, and they're trying to connect the word killing, and they can't decide which word they're going to use, kill or killing or killer or blood sacrifice or human sacrifice or ritual sacrifice, or they're just using all these different words. It's because you're placing these words in there to fit this narrative that you believe. And whatever. Like I said, I'm just going to go my own way. If you can't figure it out, I'm sorry. Hopefully you'll figure it out though, but just do you. We'll let it be. And have a good one. Peace.